All right, hello and welcome back, everybody. Dr. Sears back again. Not with a lecture, but instead a walkthrough or a guide, or yeah, a little bit of training, I guess we could call it, into what we're going to be doing for the first lab for MIET 306 Mine Ventilation 1. And this is going to be looking at the differences between sweep and split ventilations and how you can ventilate a section of a mine using those two different techniques. So let's jump right into this, okay? And the first thing I want to explain to you is that this is something that you're going to be seeing on possibly the mine foreman exam. If you go that route into supervisory roles and that sort of thing, you'll see stuff like this and have to be able to draw this onto a map. Okay. This map that you see on the screen, this was drawn it says on the map in 2005 for the state of Kentucky. Okay, and it's part of their mine foreman training that I shared with the class. Okay, so this is where these came from. So the task is that we're going to walk through is ventilating this mine in section. I say mine because it has everything, including the fan. So we have the fan here, and we're going to be using sweep ventilation where a blowing fan is in the number 1 entry. Okay. So what's the first thing, when you get to a mine that you notice, especially if it's a drift mine, right? I know that some of my students may not be familiar with these types of mines. It's possible. The first thing that you would notice is a set of double doors or airlock doors, right? Called airlock doors because they keep the air from flowing out of this opening. Okay. If these were not here and everything else is in place, the air is just going to short circuit, right? Because it's coming here, right? It's being pushed into the mine under positive pressure, and it's just going to go whoop, right out through here. Okay, so at some point you do have to have, the airlock here to get in. And so what would come next after that? We're going to need stoppings. And we don't have a lot of entries to work with, right? So we're sweeping the air. We don't have a lot of entries to work with. This mine in this example is so short. You could just have 1 intake and 1 return for sure, but let's make it a little more realistic. Let's pretend like this is going for a much further distance. And so I'm going to use 2 intakes, right? And have 2 return entries. There's only 1 neutral in this case, and it's the belt line. Okay, so we have stoppings along the belt line. In this particular case, the dump point is right here in between these 2 pillars. That's the way it's drawn on all of these maps. I don't know if I've ever seen this before. Okay, I'm pretty certain that I've only ever seen tailpieces that were in the intersection, which had 3-way dumps on them. So you could dump from multiple sides, right? Left, right, and in front for the different shuttle cars. Typically, we're running 3. Most likely in this case, what this is depicting is a single miner, a section that only had 2. Okay? And here. We're going with it because this is, likely what's exactly on the exam. We've got our stoppings in, but we have our neutral entry, which is the belt line, and it's neutral, but some amount of air comes onto here, right? Both through leakage from the intake, okay, and through a regulator. We're going to have a regulator on these neutral entries, assuming that you're not using belt air at the face or something like that. Regulator here to allow a small amount of air. I mean, generally you want your neutrals pretty neutral, okay, but a small amount of air to come back here onto the belt line, which would then flow back this way, right? Because this is a blowing fan. All of this is less pressure than stuff over here, right? And stuff back here, okay? Where the highest pressure is right here, right in front of the fan. That's, a point there. And you're back to atmospheric pressure right over here. So what else do we need? We've got the stoppings in place. How do we actually ventilate the section itself? And I'm going to show you sort of in order of how I think about it based on this drawing from this map that's provided, okay? Because you'll find out after this, I have a couple issues with it. Number one, we're going to need some check curtains, okay? And in this scenario, check curtains have been placed all throughout the center openings, right? So not the outsides, but we've got essentially the intake, because of this curtain and this curtain, coming up a single entry right here over number one. Air is blocked from coming off the faces and into the belt line by these curtains and the box check, which sorry. Let me jump ahead for a second. We're not gonna edit this out. We're just plowing through. Let me jump ahead for a second to their drawing. They put they had it up there. So they did put a check curtain on it. Okay, I put a box check on it, on the belt, and not a check curtain. The Kentucky map show a check curtain on the belt. We're still one off. There we are. But I put a box check because this is what I'm used to seeing, right? I'm also, not 100% sure if all this has to be here, given that the air can't return back this way. This is the way they did it. I'm going to show you other sort of ideas too, but we'll go from there. But anyways, the next thing is, now that we have this sort of air intake coming up this side, return back down this side, we need to now ventilate the faces, right? We got to get air up into here, and we're going to show how we would hang curtain, because that's the way these are. I haven't seen a problem yet with vent tubing. We'll discuss it too, but we're going to talk about this first. We're using curtain, and we'll have to ventilate those faces, okay? This is an exhausting face ventilation layout, okay? We have fresh air, the intake, coming up this side. If the miner was over here mining, it would have to be on this side of the curtain, right? Over here. Shuttle cars are changing out at this line, okay? Not up in here, okay? So we'd be mining over here, fresh air coming across the miner, then coming back out the back side of the curtain and coming around every single one of these faces, because they're all advanced up, nothing's connected through, and coming back out the return. No. Why did I just say because everything's advanced up and nothing's connected through? So this isn't, to me, a realistic kind of layout. It's made to force you into having to ventilate every single face. Okay, but in reality, for higher production, okay, this cut sequence didn't do well. And what you really want to do is have your middle entries advanced up further than the outsides, which allows you to be more equidistant from the feeder from each place you might be mining, right? It also allows you to connect cross cuts through and get your ventilation connected up early, so you don't have as many places on curtain, right? You don't want every place like that on curtain. It's You know, a lot of times you probably don't have enough air to do that. Okay, so anyways, that's the way these are designed, and that's what we have to deal with. Okay, but we've got our faces ventilated because it's blowing, or sorry, exhausting face ventilation. We have our curtain on the return side, right? So it's on this, closer to this return side. There we go. Anything else, we're going to need to add the arrows into. Okay, so I've got arrows showing the direction of all the intake air coming through this way up to the one entry here, across the faces. It was too hard to draw them up into these places, but that's where they go, and then back out the return. Okay, and that is how it's drawn in the presentation. Okay, just like that. However, West Virginia is maybe different. Their maps are drawn a little bit different than this. I think, though, that this was probably just an oversight because I see regulators used regularly in more of the maps in the Kentucky foreman's presentation. But I would think that most would want to see a regulator on the return. In almost all of these, in fact, in all of these, you will see regulators on all of the returns from now on, after this. And so I just assumed that it was probably meant to be there, and it was either forgotten about, or for some reason they're not requiring it to be shown, or something like that. But anyways, this has got to be blocked off, right? And this way you can control the amount of air that's flowing through this system, right? And then I also added our neutral arrow. I did it in green. I think it may need to be orange. But anyways, and it's coming back out by this way, right? This is the direction of airflow because the pressure here is higher than the pressure out here. Air has to flow this way through this air course. So here's an example of the map from the West Virginia foreman's exam, and it's a little bit closer to what I'm used to, even though it's a little bit different. But they got 5 entries here. The belt's not in the middle. It's over number 2. Okay, sure. But a couple of things that you do see on this map, well, they have it, at least the feeders here, so that you can dump from multiple sides, but they've got it stopping off. So I'm not, still not what I'm used to. I'm used to seeing, 3-way dumps. And they've also got it right up in the next to last row, right, for both of these sections, no matter how you want to look at this. It's right up here in the face, which is, so they had a good belt move last night. But because these aren't driven up out ahead, you really just, you start, your way, your haul distances just don't add up, right? So in this case, you'd actually probably want to drive these 3 entries sort of up out ahead of these and get started connecting your ventilation in here as you go, and then you sort of get, you see what I'm saying? Your haul distances are much more similar. You have ventilation connect. You don't have as many places on curtain. There's a number of reasons why this layout of forcing you to show how you're ventilating each entry isn't necessarily as realistic as you wish it was, right? But they have check curtains up here so that you can actually run through this line. And that's what I'm used to. I'm used to seeing that, optimally, if the miner's here mining, you're going to want to change out shuttle cars right here. Not somewhere else. And you definitely want to be able to, dump from both sides. Look how many entries to the right you have. So just my issues with what they consider to be correct. But you do see regulators on all returns here. So they're not double regulated. Each regulator, everything's separately regulated. And then this is an exhausting fan, okay? So you have, high negative pressure pulling the air out. And so you have lower pressure back here than you would if you had a blowing fan, right? So there's a negative pressure back here, pulling air out. And that's why you now have a regulator on the belt that's back here. Okay? So the regulator on the belt is here, comes back over this way, onto the return. Okay. So with that, then and this, by the way, is split ventilation and not sweep air. You've got your intakes coming up the middle and splitting across. And that's what we're going to talk about next, but we're going to do it with a more realistic 9-entry super section. But before we get to that, I did sort of rethink this scenario, put the tailpiece up here in the intersection so that you can actually get to it with from all three sides, and sort of change this ventilation to what I think is better. And I could definitely be wrong about this. I'm not some sort of ventilation guru or expert by any means. But if it was me, I would definitely. I left the curtains the way they had them. You can't change out up here. You can't drive through these. But anywho, it's a different variation of ventilating that same map. So your task, the first task is going to sort of be recreating this map. However, you have an exhausting fan in the number 1 entry. So you're going to have return on the left, intake on the right. And so go through that, ventilate this section, and that's going to be task 1 prior to us getting into the 9-entry sort of super section here. And so we are going to ventilate this section with split ventilation using entries 6 through 8 as intake, assuming a blowing fan. Okay. So just from the problem statement, okay, we know that these 3 entries are intake. Okay, 6, 7, 8 are intake. I know that I'm going to have returns somewhere, okay, and they're going to be on the outsides, okay? And I decided to go ahead and have at least the same number of returns that I do intakes, and I have 3. I did that because, generally speaking, it's nice to have a third neutral entry, okay? It's nice to have a third one for various reasons. Like one of these could be the travelway, one could be a scoop road, right? Like if you're using track, you want to be able to get a scoop all the way through there, to be honest with you, if you can, right? It gives you more room to place equipment and supplies and all that stuff, and not have it sitting in the intake and definitely not in the return, okay? So anyways, that's the way I chose to do it. You got 3 of each. 3 neutrals, 3 intakes, 3 returns. And so now I've got to try and get that air onto the section. And so I'm going to bring that over to a single entry. Okay. All of that air is coming up through here, and it's going to go through right here. And I chose number 6 and not the center entry number 5 because I don't have to, I don't have to bring that air over a whole nother entry. It doesn't really make a difference. You're still ventilating 5 places on the left and 4 on the right. And so I'm just bring it straight up through here. Got check curtains across the rest of the openings, except for returns on the left and right. And then, of course, this will split to a second return on the way outside, right? And I did show this being taken back to 1 Like if this was like the outside of the mine, maybe it would look something like this. And coming out this regulator. Regulators in both returns. Regulator for the neutrals. Okay. So, here we are. Got our check curtains. What about the line curtains? Now, once again, this was a map from Kentucky. I used line curtain the whole way, not a check curtain through, through these here. You can do either, I suppose, and if this is what they want for the exam, then I would give them whatever they want. Okay, and once again, knowing that this is not realistic at all, and it's just making you ventilate each one of these areas. In fact, it's just repeating of the two, right? And in reality, most likely, unless you've done something wrong, you're going to see these entries advance much further in the middle, right? It's just the best way to do it. But this is what's on the exam. So keep that in mind, that likely you're not going to have nearly as many places on curtain. And you're going to have a lot of entries connected up in various places. Yeah. So, but with that, and I also drew in all of the arrows once again. We've got intake coming up through these 3 entries. It then comes through this one, splits to both sides. Curtains are on the return side so that the air comes up across the miner and exhausts out the back of the curtain. Returns on both sides. Regulators where they need to be. And that ends up being close to what was drawn by the Kentucky folks. And instead, I moved the feeder such that you could, actually, dump from 3 sides, because that's what you want to do, especially on a super section, right? And you're running at least 2 shuttle cars, maybe 3, but probably just 2. They bring the intake air all the way up to here. For some reason, I'm not 100% sure why. Maybe somebody knows that's better than me why they box checked off this little area. It doesn't make sense to me, but, maybe it's to start necking these entries down earlier, and maybe it flows better, but I doubt it. Anyways, they bring it over to number 5 and then run 2 curtains up number 5, one on each side to split the air. And I got to admit that I'm sure it's happened somewhere, but I've never seen this before in my life. Maybe it has. Maybe it hasn't. And then returns down both sides. They kept 4 neutrals. I think that's excessive. Especially given that you don't have one of the other neutrals on the other side of the belt. Now that might make sense, having neutrals on both sides. But that's my opinion. If this provides enough air for this section, then you go ahead and ventilate it like this. But anywho, once again, I would refer back to the the West Virginia map, which does show split ventilation again. It's got intake coming up these 2 entries, 3 and 4, coming up to the face here. Just a neutral belt, no neutral travel way. So you're gonna be freezing to death riding down the track in this place. But anyways, air comes up all the way to the face, right? So they're not mixing it until right here, and then it goes up and splits off. It doesn't really have 2 curtains, right? It's just gonna go both ways. Okay, it just will. Yeah. And then returns on all regulators, or returns on all regulators on all returns. And so that's going to be task 2, right? So we're going to ventilate the following section with split ventilation using entries 2 through 4 as the intake. So we're going to put the intake over here, and we're going to assume an exhausting main fan. Okay? So you'll ventilate this just like using the techniques that we did in the walkthrough, and that'll be task 2. And that will finish up Mine 306 ventilation laboratory number 1. And so with that, we'll see you next time.